I think it's time to begin with the third lecture. So now we'll find out where it all comes to in the end.
The dramatic climax begins now. Thanks everybody for coming back again and again. I know some people will be drifting in for the next few minutes, but I'm glad to see you. In my first lecture, I focused on this idea that as a person moves through the world and their body interacts with the ground and with the light and the shapes of things and the shapes in between things, the relationship between their body and the environment generates new features, new properties in the world that are good for them or bad for them, enablements and constraints. Given the pursuit of some goal, the interaction between the person and the world generates affordances. My realist view is that the goodness or the badness of these affordances are objectively real in the sense that they don't depend on whether or not the person sees them or hopes that they are there or fears that they are there or wants them to be there. They are discovered in the world through investigation, or they can be created like the physical affordances by designers and architects deliberately created in the world to make people's lives easier or harder. So my proposal in that first lecture was that we can understand religious practices similarly as discovering and using affordances like that. And I gave this optimistic analogy. Just as a person in a wheelchair might not be able to take advantage of the goodness of the log for sitting, they can't take advantage of it themselves, they can still understand that property, they can still perceive that property, and they can see it as an affordance for other people. And so if that analogy fits, then the scholar of religion can see and understand the value of the affordances created by religious practices, even when they don't participate in those practices themselves. That was lecture one. In the second lecture yesterday, I became a little less optimistic. The issue that I worry about, it arises because affordances only exist for the individuals who have the skill to use it. And the people will be more or less capable in their ability to discover and use the affordances. So my analogy for this situation was that toddler, that young child who wants to join older kids sitting on a log, but they're not able to use the affordance that they can see other people enjoying. But there's even a worse scenario, and my analogy for this was the chessboard. The novice chess player who is unable to see the winning moves in the arrangement of the pieces on the board, even though other more advanced players can see them, the novice player can't see the affordances that the advanced players are using, and those advanced the affordances created by the position of the pieces on the board are invisible until you're competent enough to recognize them. So my worry was that if we start to see religious practices as training to see and use affordances, they might not be intelligible for people who are not expert in a given practice. So not everything that's taught by a religious community will be accessible and intelligible to people until they achieve a certain level of skill. That was yesterday. So here's my third and final concept. After affordances on day one and skills on day two, the focus of today's talk is niches. So that's N-I-C-H-E-S is the spelling in English. And I emphasize this word because I think it would not be known by maybe half of my students. It's not a common word. Maybe affordances is not a common word either. Maybe I need to find 3 rare words and get rid of skills so that everything I sounds a little bit obscure. So to introduce the idea of affordances, I used that idea of a log that has the property of being good for sitting. And I thought this log was a good example of a physical object because it offers a way for us to grasp the idea of an affordance, because sitting down to rest is a goal-directed activity that's pretty universal. Everybody does it. but usually affordances are not standalone good opportunities that don't require anything else other than a tree that fell in the woods. Many affordances are part of a network. Like the chair here in this room, and you would say, well, like a log, sort of, the chair affords sitting for the person who can use it, and that's when they attend a lecture. But the lecture had to be arranged by somebody, and the lecture helps you make progress in your degree program, which also had to be arranged by somebody. And the degree program is a path within the university, which also had to be arranged by somebody. And that gets funded by the government of a nation, and that also had to be arranged by somebody. So my first example of the log was so simple, where you can see that it has a good property for sitting, but the goodness of a seat in a lecture hall where you hear a lecture that contributes to a degree program that's part of a university that's funded by a government, you can see that's what I mean when I say a lot of affordances are part of a network. It presupposes a network of other affordances in multiple interconnected practices. And it might be changing over time as the funding for the lecture program gets changed or the degree program alters what it is that you need to do to graduate. And all of these structures are evolving. I think it's usually best to think of affordances as part of a dynamic social ecology that's built not only out of the physical objects like the log that fell in the woods. The network or this ecology includes all the participating people and all the other objects like the desk that's in front of the chair and the building that the chair is in and the room and the cool electric sign that pops up with the correct time on the wall. It's a network that supports or structures or enables the affordance of the chair. So in today's third lecture, I want to talk about the ways in which an affordance, lecture 1, and the skills that one can develop in getting good at using that affordance, lecture 2, it finds its home in this network. And the word I want to use for a network is this word niches. So the word niche, it refers to a setting or a position that is suitable or comfortable or fitting. I think if you Google niches with images, you often find a picture of a wall with like a space in it, and you could put a vase in that space with flowers or a picture in that setting or in that position. It's a suitable or a fitting place for a museum display or for decorating a home. That's example number 1. Here's a second example that's a little bit more complicated, but it's another analogous use of the concept of niches. You might say that when an instructor was hired at the University of Tartu, they felt at home, as if their personal goals of what they had wanted for themselves and what the job was providing in terms of what they were being asked to do and the salary and so forth, they were a good match. And so they might say, I finally found my niche. That would be a normal way to use the word. And here's my third analogous example of what a niche is. Not just a space where you could put flowers or a role for yourself in your career. The term niche gets used in ecology for the role that gets taken by a particular organism in that local biological system. For example, you might say something like this. The disappearance of the wolves from the national park, it left a niche that eventually got filled by smaller foxes and weasels. There's like a role in the ecological system. It's not a physical space like where you put the flowers, and it's not your job, like my second example. So this is the biological or ecological sense of the term, and that's the one that I want to focus on and use today. People often think that animals have evolved, changed over time in order to fit a particular niche in the natural world, a particular habitat in the natural world. For example, giraffes evolved as herbivores that eat leaves that are high up in a tree as opposed to eating grass that's down on the ground. So you could say that's the giraffe's niche, that's what it prefers to eat, and it has access to the parts of the plants that other animals can't reach. Usually people think of the natural world as there, and it has these niches. It has the structure that it does, grass on the ground and leaves up high. And then animals evolve to fit in the natural world. It's almost, this maybe sounds distorting, but it's almost as if nature is there and then animals arrived and they grew into where they would fit into the system. However, evolutionary biologists have recently developed what they call niche construction theory, which I wrote on the board. And when I first came across it, they kept calling it NCT, and then I was lost, until I had to research what they were talking about. So according to this niche construction theory, some animals don't simply evolve to fit into the environment or fit into the space or the role in the environment that was already there. They don't just move into a niche like as if the niche was an apartment waiting for the animal to pay rent. Weird metaphor. Instead, some animals actually reshape the natural world. They reshape their environment in order to create a comfortable or a suitable position in which they can live. So they construct or they build their own biological niche. That's niche construction theory. An example of this is bees build hives. They don't move into hives or discover hives or find hives or think, oh, the hive is my niche. The bee is building the hive. Spiders build webs. Birds build nests. So there's several examples of this niche construction theory. Actually, etymologically, the word niche comes from the Latin word for a nest, the Latin noun for a nest. Niche and nest are etymologically related. And then in French, they actually have a verb nicher, to build a nest, to nest as an activity. The example of niche construction that, kind of like my toddler, kind of like my chess novice and the puzzle that they're trying to solve, the example that I have of niche construction, the one that I like the best, is beavers that make dams. If you look closely, I don't think it's easy to see maybe, but if you look closely at the poster for this event, for this third lecture, there's a picture of a beaver's face smiling at you. Not a cartoon beaver, an actual beaver. And this is because when I was preparing this talk and I was trying to think of animals that make their own home in the natural world, animals that reshape the environment, I saw pictures of before and after pictures of woods. And the before and after was before and after a family of beavers had built a dam in the stream, and the results were dramatic. So the beaver's dam stopped the flow of water, and it flooded acres and acres of woods. It transformed them basically into a swampy area, and it expanded dramatically the amount of space that the beavers had where they could safely live and they could store their food underwater. But just think, if you flip back to what I said before, of the disappearance of the wolves made a niche that weasels and foxes moved into. Why did the wolves leave? Well, because their woods got flooded, and the wood there got wet and rotten, and that made a new ecological niche for bugs to move into it, and the transformation affected by the beavers making their dam, I thought was more effective, had greater effects than the bird making a nest or the spiders making their webs. The effects of the beaver's nesting practices or niche construction practices were enormous, not just for the beavers, but for all the animals living in this area. And this illustrates this idea of NCT or niche construction theory, that organisms don't just adapt to a pre-given environment. They actually actively modify their environments, but those modifications in turn shape the resources, the possibilities, the affordances for themselves and for lots of other animals. So there's this dynamic relationship, or I'm tempted to say dialectical relationship, between the creativity of the animals that are changing their environments and then the animals shaping the lives and ultimately the evolution of the animals. So far so good? That makes sense? So as you can imagine, niche construction theory promises to be especially important for our understanding of human beings. Like birds and spiders, human beings reshape the natural world to make it more comfortable for themselves. Now, perhaps the most straightforward example is that human beings wear clothes and they build houses. The first human animals appeared, Homo appeared 2.5 or 3 million years ago, and Homo habilis is the Latin phrase for the tool-using human, or we could maybe say the niche-constructing human, that appeared about 2 million years ago. So here is a fascinating idea to think about that I had never dawned on me really until I started exploring this niche construction theory. One of the most transformative moments in the history of human animals was the ability to control fire. And this happened about 1 million years ago. If I can open a parentheses or a footnote and recommend a movie to you, it's called Quest for Fire. Does anyone know this movie? 1981, so it's not a new movie, and I don't like it when people give away the ends of movies. But you should have seen it by now because it's over 40 years old, so it's your fault. And you can tell from the title, there's a group of cave people living before language had emerged, which makes the movie boring for my university students because nobody talks in the movie. They're all cave people without language. They live in a cave at the beginning of the movie, but they already have fire at the beginning of the movie. They have a fire that maybe lightning hit a tree. I'm not sure where they got it. And they just put a stick into it so it doesn't go out. They put a stick into it 10 minutes later so it doesn't go over and over. They don't want to lose their fire. Think about the difference between having a little bitty fire that you're trying to keep alive and a fire that people who don't have fire, right? The people who have fire, wolves and other threatening predators are not coming by if there's a fire at the entrance of your cave. So this is their security. Also, they can cook their food for the first time. They don't have to eat everything raw, and the cooking of food transforms it and makes it so much easier to digest. So the fire means everything to them, and at the opening of the movie, another group of cave people come and harass them and knock over their fire and put their fire out, and then they run away. It's not a terrible, violent movie. It's just they lose their fire, and then you just see them standing around their fire and staring at it sadly, and they're kind of grunting, you know, oh. There's no subtitles. There goes our fire or something. There's no dialogue in the movie. They lose their fire, and that's the title of the movie, Quest for Fire. They go, we need more fire, so let's go look for some. They have no idea. They are wandering for the entire movie going, you know, where's there some fire? They don't know where it comes from or how to get it. At the end of the movie, which I told you, I'm going to give you a spoiler, they meet another group of people, another group of cave people, and they show them, they take a stick and they rub the stick against it. You know how you can make fire by rubbing sticks, and they start feeding like dead grass to it, and they're just rubbing it, and they're just staring at it in ignorance of what's happening until they see the warmth of the two sticks rubbing is getting warmer and warmer, and they put the dead grass in there, and it starts to smoke. And eventually it catches fire and there's a little flame, and the human beings made fire. This is the transformative moment in human history, and you're there with the camera watching it happen, and the cave people who've been on a quest for fire, they cry when they realize, wait, we don't have to just look for fire and wonder what it is. We have the ability to control our environment to this extent, and we can make fire. And they invent a bunch of things in the movie, so maybe it all didn't happen in one day, but in the movie it happens really quickly. There's an anthropologist named Agustin Fuentes, and he says the human control of fire is a crucial part of the construction of the human niche. In a way, it's not for spiders, right? It's not for birds. It's not for beavers. The control of the ability to control fire and eventually the ability to make fire, plus, much later, the domestication of plants, so that you're going to change what you eat, but you're going to have food available. You're not just going to have to walk around and be a quote-unquote hunter-gatherer. And so your diet is changing. And eventually the domestication of some animals, which is a complex arrangement because there's benefits to that, but there's also, you get exposed to new diseases. And so you have to build up immunity to these diseases. Otherwise there's plagues and human beings die. These things, control of fire, domestication of plants, domestication of animals, they didn't just shape how people lived. It didn't just shape human culture. Human niche construction also shaped human biology, because you don't need the fur if you have a fire, and your guts have to change if you're going to eat grains. And if you're getting exposed to the germs from the animals, your immune system is going to alter. So this anthropologist that I'm pointing to, Agustin Fuentes, he has a slogan, "Culture becomes anatomy." It's a powerful slogan, I think, and it breaks down this idea that, oh, well, there's nature, and human beings have to live in nature. That they are constructing their own niche, and then their own niche is having an effect on how they evolved for the last million years or so. So, because this NCT, this niche construction theory idea, is that human beings work to construct their own niche. They reshape nature to make it more comfortable for themselves. And then they evolve along evolutionary paths that get afforded by the niche they live. Niche construction theory can undermine a sharp distinction between nature and culture that I think most modern thinkers, most scholars of religion have assumed that kind of a dualism. Okay, so I've been treating human beings as these niche building animals. And so I'm treating as human beings as like nest building birds and web building spiders. But there's two things that are distinctive about the human niche. First, the human niche is not just physical, logs you can sit on, fires that keep you warm and so forth. It includes clothes. It includes houses. It includes the control of fire. It includes the domestication of plants and animals. And all of these aspects of the human niche make life easier for people. They may have had an effect on our evolution, the way that Fuentes suggests. But the human niche also includes language. And through the use of language, it includes the creation of collective institutions. There's a famous book in philosophy, How to Do Things with Words, and the human niche would not be built without people doing things with words when they make a promise to each other or when they give things names. For example, people publicly promise each other they will support each other, quote unquote, in sickness and in health, in a marriage ceremony for the rest of their lives. And the use of this language is necessary to how marriages are created. They make babies in that cave people movie that I referred to, but they didn't have any marriages, right? They didn't have language. Apparently, those things are possible. So a marriage is a social reality. It's this invented status, oh, those two people are partnered in a certain way, and it only exists because linguistically we agree with each other that marriages exist, that those partnerships exist. Another aspect of the human niche that only exists because we collectively, linguistically agree that it exists is money. We take a physical object like a piece of paper and we collectively give it a new status. We say this piece of paper is worth lunch, basically. This other piece of paper is worth, what's expensive? A coat. But the difference in the value of those two pieces of paper has to be something that we all collectively agree on, and then you raise the young members of your society to say, oh, but this one is worth more than that one. Another aspect of the human niche that only exists because we use language to say that it exists is nations. We take an area of land and we collectively give it a new status, and we say, but this part is ours and on the other side of the river is yours. These social realities, marriages, money, nations, they presuppose and depend upon collective agreement. They're studied in a branch of philosophy called social ontology. So this isn't the ontology or the study of things like tigers or rocks or black holes that would just exist whether or not there were human beings. This is the study of things that presuppose or depend upon human beings agreeing, yes, that's a marriage, that's a nation, that's a euro. If I can open one more footnote, social ontology studies these things that only exist that presuppose human collective agreement. There is you might say a subset of social ontology, or maybe you'd call it a development of social ontology called critical social ontology. Or maybe we'd call it second wave. I just invented that, I think. Second wave social ontology, critical social ontology. And the critique of first wave is this. You're studying marriages and nations and money. Those are very typical examples in social ontology, as if they're just neutral things like, okay, we all agree that's money. Okay, we all agree this is Estonia, so forth. But not everybody agrees. Some people go, that's not where the border is. And I don't even agree that there should be borders. And nor do I think that my time is worth that much money. Like, they don't always agree. Or marriages are just as political as nations and money. So there's critical social ontology that say, you know what happens is not everybody agrees that's money. What happens is some people agree, we're going to call it this, and we're going to treat it that way. We're going to give it that status. And it could be, and we're going to say, you know, because it's your daughter or it's your wife, she doesn't get a say in how we decide things about this village. And so they've got rules about gender that are social constructions. They're a product of social ontology, but it's not everybody that said, yeah, that's right, that's the way it is. And it would be the same thing with racial categories. This person is that kind of a person. It's not that everybody just said, oh, that would be useful if we did it that way. There's a political dimension to the creation of social realities. And critical social ontology is a little frustrated by first generation social ontologists saying, well, you know, people made this up, as if there was no politics or power involved. There is Professor Åsa Bergman at Stockholm who has the power view of social ontology, and I recommend her book to you. So this linguistic and institutional enlargement of the affordances in the world through money, through marriages, through nations, and so forth. It connects, I think, to the question that came up yesterday, because human beings might build a physical chair that's a resting place, like the log. They can build the chair. And the chair might get used, like the log might get used, by a monkey or by a bird. But human beings can add a level, quote unquote, metaphorically speaking. They can add a level to the chair. And they can say, that's the chair that you promised you would save for me to sit at during the lecture. And I don't think the monkey can do that. I don't think the bird can do that. So there's like a linguistic addition or a level. Or you could say something like this. This is the chair that was left to me by my grandfather in his will, and it means a lot to me. I don't think the monkey and the bird can do that. So like there's affordances that are shared with all animals, but there's going to be some that are dependent on language and dependent on the capacities of human memory and lawyers. So the chair could have aspects that are only available to language users. So I said there was two things that were distinctive of the human niche, and one of them is this linguistic and institutional levels or dimensions. And the second thing that's distinctive of human niche construction, which is not going to surprise you, is that human niche construction dwarfs everybody else's niches. It's just absolutely, on planet Earth, it's massive, the effects of the human creation of what would be comfortable for human beings to live like. So we are like the bird with its nest, and we are like the spider with its web, but we're even more like the beaver with its dam that just floods acres and acres of land to make it more comfortable for the beaver, and then now the wolves can't live there. But even that analogy doesn't reflect the impact of human practices and language and institutions and technology on the world as the planet overheats and species die out at a rate that's hard to grasp mentally. We live in today what many people call the Anthropocene era. So this is a term for an ecological era defined by the significant and lasting impact of human activity on Earth's geology and ecosystems. It's because of the effects of human niche construction that I resist agreeing with people that say things like social realities are imaginary realities. Nations are not real. They're things that people are are real. And money is not a real entity like a rock is a real entity or a star is a real entity. People act as if money is real, but it's not really. Like I hesitate to use this as if language or this imaginary language because the effects of human niche construction, the nation building that I referred to, the capitalism that I referred to, the effects of this, the social ontology are so huge that I'm not happy with what seems to me like an idealistic interpretation of nations and money. My short answer is if something has if something has effects on the world, then it's real. And that would mean that social entities like money and nation, I'd rather have a realist interpretation, not an idealist interpretation of those things. Okay, I think I'm halfway. Assuming that this idea of niche construction theory is clear, I want to focus on one recent contribution to the discussion of human niche construction theory by a philosopher of science. I'm going to write his name on the board. His name is Joseph Rouse. I don't think he's a giant name that everybody would know. He's alive now, and his books are fairly recent. He argues that one of the ways that human beings build their ecological niche is not just through the creation of clothes and houses, it's not just through the creation of money and nations, it's also through the practice of science. He has two philosophical books about this. The first one is called Articulating the World, and the second one has the bullseye title, Social Practices as Biological Niche Construction. That's wordy. I'm going to tell him. I've never met him. So in these two books, he's developing this idea that science is not merely a way of representing the world that's already out there. Instead, by developing the practices of science, that's to say the material aspects, the conceptual aspects, the social supports for scientific practice, that is to say, inventing microscopes and telescopes and laboratories and professional societies that meet together in Tallinn or wherever, and journals that publish their research. The whole apparatus, the material apparatus of science, when they do that, science reshapes the human niche. It contributes to, let's build it this way. So he's treating science not as, well, it's the knowledge about stars or cells or molecules. He's saying, no, it's a social practice that's going to be located in a certain time and place. His point, though, is not only that science expands the human niche because science is an activity that people can do. A person can put on a white lab coat and they can work in a laboratory and that can be their job, and they can write journal articles about biochemistry or whatever. He's not just saying, look, it's changing the niche because it's a thing that people can do. It's a social practice. His point is this: scientific practices expand the human niche because these practices change what we understand by the world. The scientific information and data collection, the knowledge that's produced in those practices changes how people think about the world. Changes the world for people. The development and the use of new instruments such as microscopes and particle accelerators and gene sequencers, those are some of his examples. Along with those laboratories, along with those new journals, they create new domains of interaction between human beings and their environment. They create new domains of interaction in the human niche that had not existed previously. When I read him, I felt like, oh, he's talking about something that's not just true, that science is expanding our engagement with the world. It's doing it faster and faster. I think about the fact that, like, the phrase double helix for DNA, that phrase didn't exist when my mom was young. The phrase habitable exoplanet, I don't even know that existed when I was young. People were like, well, surely there's other planets going around other stars, not just in our solar system. But now they're like, well, sure, and here's a picture of it. Like, it's amazing the way that science is expanding our understanding of what the world is, both in the smaller scale and in the larger scale. So the scientific theories and instruments and labs and institutes, they change what parts of the world human beings can have an effect on. They can have an effect on genes and on stem cells. And we could colonize Mars and so forth. Scientific institutions like physics laboratories and medical schools reorganize human social life and human capacities. So in these ways, scientific practices expand the evolving human niche. They expand the human-built environment that structures our possibilities for perception and action and understanding. So what's attractive about this idea that I'm putting on this table, the Joseph Rouse idea that scientific practices are part of our niche construction, what's attractive about me is that I would categorize it as part of what you might call the third wave of science studies. So I really quickly want to go first wave, second wave, third wave. First wave, for a couple of centuries after the scientific revolution, Europeans lifted up science, often by contrasting it with religion, and they would say, this is the best example of human society stripping away our superstitions, stripping away cultural biases to see the world the way it is. This science versus religion contrast dramatically shaped what it means to do religious studies, I think. That's first wave. Science was said to be an objective, value-free way of finding out what was real for a couple centuries. A slogan in the United States is, the facts don't care about your feelings. That's first wave science. However, building in earnest in the 1960s and 1970s, 1980s, there emerged what's called the second wave of science studies that was critical of the first wave, critical of this Enlightenment assumption that science is just a mirror of nature. It tells us what's out there. Second wave theorists were social constructionists who challenged the assumption that science simply reflects reality as it is, and instead they treated science as a set of social practices, like Rouse does, shaped by the practitioner's interests and their epistemic location. A common challenge is this: what corporation paid for your research? It's not like the person was just, I wonder what molecules will help people lose weight or something like that. Some corporation said, this is going to make us money, so we're going to fund laboratories that do this. Or even if we can muddy the water so it seems like smoking doesn't cause cancer. So second wave science studies had the goal of demystifying science. Perhaps the best known examples of the second wave are the early part of Bruno Latour, studying how laboratories are producing scientific knowledge, how they produce their conclusions. David Bloor and Barry Barnes have what they call the STRONG program in the sociology of scientific knowledge. Scientific knowledge is a product of a society that's structured in a certain way, and if it's structured in a different way, they produce different kinds of knowledge. And my third example of second wave science studies is Evelyn Fox Keller and other feminist scholars of science who pointed out that there were masculinist biases operating in the apparent, allegedly objective claims about what gets treated as natural. So, first wave, science is objective and value-free. Second wave, no it isn't, we're calling your bluff. And now I'm putting Rouse in what we might call the third wave. The third wave of science studies agrees with the second wave. Science is a set of historically and culturally located social practices, and they agree that science is therefore shaped by the interests of the people who do the science, by the perspectives of the people who do the science. So third wave, maybe dialectically like Hegel, they're accepting the second wave. They're not saying that's wrong. Nevertheless, third wave scholars argue that even though every investigation of the world comes from a particular perspective, some perspectives are still better than others at seeing what's going on. So even though science might not be value-free or objective as the first wave assumed it was, the third wave wants to avoid the social constructionist flattening of all social practices as equal, all forms of knowledge as equal. So for this reason, Rouse's treatment of scientific practices as creating domains of interaction with the world, like the genes and the, what was the other example I gave, the stem cells, He says that's part of human niche construction, and that fits, I think, with what you might call perspectival realism, which is the title of a woman's important philosophy of science book, or critical realism, which is the movement that I've identified with in the past. According to the perspectival realism or critical realism, our knowledge of the world, it is shaped by where we stand. It is shaped by our interests. It is shaped by the particular tools that we happen to have, but it's still knowledge of the world. So that's Rouse's suggestion. Let's bring science down to the level and say it's social practices, but that doesn't mean that it's not producing knowledge or that the perspectives that give us might be better than other perspectives depending on what our purposes are. So now I think I'm at the point where I can connect this to the study of religious practices. My proposal is that we treat religious practices the way that he treats scientific practices. This means that religious practices, like scientific practices, would be part of human niche construction, both in the sense that, well, it's something you can do, it's an addition to culture, but also that it's expanding our knowledge of what's real. The first sense, human religions are part of our niche construction. I don't think that's controversial. The first claim is that religious practices contribute to the building and shaping of the human living environment, and the creation of religion as a form of life involves the new social roles, sometimes new texts, sometimes new buildings dedicated to the practices that they do, new senses of social identity. All those things would shape the human niche. That's why I don't think this is controversial. Treating human religious practices as part of the human niche construction, it raises the possibility that the human invention of religion, kind of like the invention of fire, has had an effect on what kind of being we are, what kind of animal we are, on our evolution. But I think this is relatively uncontroversial because I think that most scholars of the academic study of religion have long treated religious practices as shaping human experiences, as allaying fears, as divining what people should do, as stabilizing social norms about sexuality and work and war. Human religions are part of human culture. I don't think that part's controversial. The second sense, and now I've built to this point, this idea that religious practices are also like scientific practices because they open up domains of interaction with the world that would be absent if we didn't have those practices. That, I think, is more controversial. My proposal is that religious practices are not only a social construction, they are a social construction or a human-built environment that enables the exploration, the investigation, the inquiry into new domains of interaction with whatever exists. So it's like a laboratory where they say, well, we're going to be doing gene sequencing. The laboratory makes possible something that didn't exist before, and I'm thinking of religions on that analogy. Religious practices supported by the material culture, the clothes and the buildings and the texts and the arrangements between people, it's like a school or it's like a laboratory. It's like anywhere else where inquiry goes on or investigation or exploration goes on. So I think that religion is part of human niche construction in this controversial sense because it creates new domains of interaction with the world. To the extent that this idea is correct, then the best metaphor for religious practices wouldn't be something like this. Well, religion produces believers, or religion is like a machine that trains people on how they're supposed to behave. Or religion is like a cookie cutter that is a form of social formation so that it produces people who act appropriately according to their rules. All of those treat the religious participant involved in the social practice as if they're not a human being, but they're just some inanimate object. I think that the best metaphor is going to be something like this. Religious practices are like a school, and it's designed to teach the people taking those practices about the reality of different affordances and the skills and how to do them properly. So religious practices are a way of creating knowledge to explore or investigate or inquire into the world from that perspective. Here's the question that I asked myself. This is the question that I had to prepare for today's talk. If you want to explore this idea with me, that religious practices include this dimension of investigation or exploration of inquiry, what is it they're inquiring into? What is it they're trying to find out about? What are these, quote, to use Rouse's phrase, the domains of interaction with reality that religions add to the human niche? I think this is a new question for philosophers of religion. I don't see other people talking this way. And so if you think that this way of treating religion as analogous to scientific practices is promising, then I could use your help. But I want to put some examples on the table to think about. So the question is, what do people learn? What do people investigate? What do people inquire into when they're involved in a religious practice? How are their brains engaged at creating a better human niche? So here's my first example. Really, I only have one example and then some other arrows. So it's easy to imagine that when somebody buries the dead of a deceased loved one, the participants in the funeral might be opening up the domain of interaction with reality that we would call mortality or something like that. They start thinking about mortality. That's the object or the subject matter that they're engaging with. And if they never opened that up, it just would not be part of the human niche. So a participant might take the reality of mortality as the domain of interaction that they want to engage. They might even be encouraged by the structure of the practice itself to think about and explore and inquire into their own mortality, especially if, for example, it includes words like human beings arose from the dust of the earth and they go back to being the dust of the earth. I think, I once said, I have a book on philosophy of religion and rituals, and I once said when I was writing that paper, I'm curious whether religious rituals could be modes of inquiry. And I gave that talk at a school, and they said, they're not modes of inquiry. Like, nobody liked that phrase. And I think I've circled back to that phrase because I think it's at least possible that people attending a funeral, if not likely that the people attending a funeral, would be exploring their thoughts, their relationship to their own mortality. I think it's likely. However, I sometimes get frustrated when I see theorists build theories of religion completely out of the fear of death. That's actually pretty common, that people say, well, other parts of life are for all these other purposes, but nobody can conquer death, and that's why we have religion. Everybody's afraid of death. I don't want to go down that road. I think that the reality of the fact that our loved ones die and that we're going to die, this mortality that I'm talking about, it's not just a fear of death that it affords thinking about. I think what death leads one to investigate depends on the perspective that you take on it. So can I go back to the first lecture when I was talking about the Ruists, about the Confucians? On Tuesday, they say that when you bury your parents in a traditional Chinese way, they don't say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to think about your own mortality. That does not come up in their texts, in their ritual. Instead, what they say is, this is an opportunity for you to think about the respect that you owe your parents, and you need to balance the scales for what they did for you when you were a child for 3 years carrying you. You should reflect that in a comportment of respect to your parents for the next 3 years. The funeral, the sacrifices that you have offered, and the way that you show your emotions on your face and in your clothes for 3 years provide the affordances not to think about the fact that you're going to die. They provide the affordance for you to think about respect and obedience to parents, or filial piety, the way it usually gets translated. So my proposal is this: just like a scientific inquiry, a religious inquiry, or maybe just like a scientific practice, a religious practice that involves one's relationship with death shapes how one thinks about that domain, but it doesn't control the conclusions that you reach. And we all have different relationships to our parents. I don't know whether you guys know Confucian thinkers, Confucian philosophers. Mengzi, here I'll write this name on the board too. Do you guys know this debate? Mengzi and Xunzi. So Mengzi is probably number 2 after the Confucius himself, one of the most important thinkers in the Confucian tradition after Kongzi himself, and he developed his ideas in this way. He said, look, if you can use the funeral, and maybe I want to be explicit about what I'm trying to put on the table for us. I'm trying to think of religious practices as a laboratory for thinking about domains of life that just wouldn't exist in the human niche if somebody didn't bring it up and say, let's explore that. So Mengzi says, you can use the funeral and all the other rituals that our founder recommended to us, and you can use that to become a better person, a junzi, remember, a superior person. And you can do that regardless of your birth. They might have used the word junzi in the past just to refer to aristocrats or people who are born better than others. But this, what we're talking about, this self-transformation through the funeral practice, this is open to everybody. And this means that human beings must have the potential to be a superior person, a virtuous person already. It's as if you must have seeds within you, or sprouts is his word, within you. Within your human nature, you must have baby plants. And the work of going to the funeral, this is what you should be thinking about when you're in the funeral, is to water your sprouts. Is to water your baby plants. So I'm drawing a line from the particular form of the religious practices of a funeral in this Ruist tradition to a positive view that all human beings by nature have pro-social, virtuous capabilities, potential within them, and our tradition is going to help you nurture that and grow that so that you're the kind of person you should be. That's what the person will be processing and dealing with and coming to terms with in this mainstream Confucian tradition. But I wanted to put both of these names up here on the board because Xunzi is another one of the most important thinkers in the Ruist tradition. It kind of goes like, it's Confucius and Mencius, they call him, but Mengzi and Xunzi. And so those are number 2 and number 3. But really it goes like Confucius and Mencius, the first guy. And Xunzi has been pushed to the side to a certain extent where they're like, he's kind of on the border, he's not as important. And it's for the following reason. It's precisely because of what I'm putting on the table today. He took the rituals, the funeral ritual. He has chapters on ritual. Some people say he's the first ritual theorist in human history, because he's like, here's how rituals work. Here's how religious practices work. He takes the rituals, the funeral rituals that I've been talking about, he takes those with utmost seriousness. But he had also read Mencius, he had also read Mengzi, and he said, Mencius is clearly wrong about what we teach about funerals. Because if people are naturally respectful to their parents, if people are not naturally respectful and obedient to their parents, they have to be shaped by the funeral ritual, then it follows that they don't have those seeds. They don't have those sprouts. The funeral is not watering a sprout like it's already there naturally. Naturally, you're a good person. Naturally, you love your parents. Naturally, you respect the harmony of the cosmic order. He's like, that's BS. Plus, read a newspaper, look outside your window. People aren't that nice. People are not naturally good, like Mencius says, they're naturally bad, is Xunzi's theory. That's the title of his chapter. Human beings are naturally bad. He doesn't think they're evil or sinful or something like that. He just thinks people are naturally, they've got guts and they get hungry and they've got sexual desires and they're lustful and they're covetous. So the work of the funeral, if you're a Confucian, I'm being Xunzi right now, if you're a Confucian and you're following what we have to teach, it's like carving. Right? If you were to make a statue or something like that, and you're carving it into the shape that you want, the funeral is not enlarging what's naturally there. It's not encouraging the way you potentially already are. That's what Mencius is claiming. What it is cutting away and carving and removing what's naturally there. So for the Xunzi followers, the funeral ritual where you force yourself to behave in a way that would not be natural for you, it doesn't lead to the exploration of, well, am I mortal? Will I live forever? It has nothing to do with your mortality. It has everything to do with your animal side and how to train it and how to make it behave. So this is one of my examples when I think of, I'm proposing that religious rituals can be treated like laboratories or schools where they say, try this on, try this out, and engage with this domain of your life. Maybe in one context, the funeral is mortality, but for the Confucians, it isn't. For the Confucians, the domain of interaction that we want to open for you and get you to explore is going to be respect for your parents. But then it's not, look, we're Confucians, do it this way. We've got teachings, you need to follow these teachings. What you have is, do this funeral, and then you have monks saying, I did the funeral, and I can see I'm naturally a good person. And so the reflections or the school or the laboratory leads him to conclusions about human nature and about every human being on the planet as having the potential for good within them naturally. It just needs to be nourished. They need to have the right material conditions to nourish that. That's where the laboratory leads for him, because he was not determined by the teachings of his school to just believe whatever they taught. And then Shunsa takes the opposite side where he says, you don't have that potential. Really, we're going to have to bend you, warp you, carve you, shape you. He's got all these quasi-violent metaphors for what the funeral ritual does to the person to make them the person they're supposed to be. That's why I said it really goes, Confucius and Mencius are the heart of the tradition, and Shunsa is on the border of another Chinese group called legalists that people might say, well, that's bordering on fascist. Right, where they say everybody is bad, everybody needs to be punished, we need to have stronger laws, we need to this is Shunsa too, we need to cut off the arms of thieves so they learn their lesson, and there's a violent imagery. The rituals lead you to see people must be like this. This is what I want to foreground, is you might say the cognitive, exploratory, investigating, debating aspects of rituals, as if rituals are not simply training people to be a certain way. So you can see, I want to open the door to treating religious practices like scientific practices, on the analogy of scientific practices, in the sense that they provide the conceptual, material, and social niche that enlarges how people live by drawing attention to domains of interaction that might otherwise be ignored, and then it would just not be part of the human niche. Human beings are creative, they're not determined by their situation, so there's not a one-to-one relationship between, well, funerals have to do with mortality. They don't. It's flexible, and it depends on how you approach what has happened, or what you do. Here's my other examples, but they're all fast. The funeral was my big one. I think that in some religious traditions, marriages would generate a domain of inquiry, a domain of interaction, having to do with the realities of obligation and commitment and responsibility. But I don't know, maybe in other religious traditions, marriages lead people to investigate, inquire, explore other aspects of their lives. I can imagine that in some religious traditions, rites of passage into adulthood, for example, when a young person gets to be around 13 years of age or so, that might generate an inquiry, an exploration, an investigation into the realities of what is maturity, what's aging, what is sexuality. But again, it depends on the apparatus of the ritual. I can imagine that in some religious traditions, practices that involve sharing a table with other people and eating, perhaps with strangers, generates an inquiry into the realities, well, who counts as a neighbor and who's welcome at the table. You're going to have the same kind of Mencius and Shunsa division on all of these issues within religious traditions, where they say, but that's not what the ritual is supposed to teach. We understand it in a different way, and that's because they're not cookie cutters telling people how to be. They're laboratories where people are exploring the possibilities for how to be human. I think I can imagine the religious practices of fasting and renunciation, generative domain of inquiry into the realities of desire, and on and on and on. I don't have a theory of religious practice that's going to be universal for every religion or every ritual. But the idea is to shift away from saying, well, the religions train their people to be a certain kind of way, as opposed to they provide a niche where people can explore and investigate these things. So last sentences. So you can see that that's my idea for the closing of this lecture series. I think scientific practices enlarge the human niche by creating domains of investigation that people can then explore and inquire into and learn about. They find out truths about those domains that are relative to their instruments, their laboratories, and to the material culture that constitutes the scientific practice. I'm agreeing with Rouse, and I'm agreeing with the second wave theorists that these are social practices created by people from their own perspectives and from their own interests. And analogously, religious practices enlarge the human niche by creating domains of investigation, but into things like mortality or responsibility or filial piety or sexuality or obligation. They discover truths about these domains. They're not truths that are objective as if, well, that would just be the true truth no matter how people lived. They're relative to the instruments and the laboratories and the material culture, just like the scientific investigations are. But I'm hoping that this way of approaching religion treats them as more interesting than the cookie cutter approach. So thank you guys for your attention.
So now we have time for some questions again. About niche construction perhaps, or something else. Is there anyone who wants to take the chance?
Hi, thank you. So I just wanted to clarify what you meant by opening up domains. Yeah. So is it like opening up the domain of mortality? Is that introspective? So like a single individual is thinking, or is it more a kind of social thing that people are debating, like philosophers or somebody?
I don't think I've ever used the word domain before today, so I like your question to get me to think about it. And I'm getting it from Rouse, who says that scientific practices open up these domains for gene therapy, for example, that it just didn't exist, a generation earlier, but now it does because we've got the lab or the technology or the concepts to be able to do things that we couldn't do before. So partly it's a creation on the human side, the social side, and partly it's, well, there's things in the world that we're discovering. And I'm trying to teach religion and treat religion exactly the same way. They've got their laboratory, which is this ritual, and they're coming to some area, some domain, like, let's say, mortality. There are structures and realities about mortality that they can discover, and it's not just that they dictate it from their words. But in most cases, those rituals will be social rituals, and there will be a tradition of how to do it. And there will probably be people who say, well, but I did the ritual, and I didn't feel that way, or that didn't come to me. And they might get silenced by their community or excluded by their community. Or maybe, who knows, they nail theses onto a church door, and they eventually transform what had been the rituals of the sacraments into understanding them in a very different way. And there's a transformation or a split, a schism within the religious community. As I think almost all of it would be social. I'm only hesitating, though. The easy answer is to say I think that it's social and that it's debated, especially when you have like intellectuals in the movement that have read each other and they debate each other and they both write manuscripts. So the answer is social. But I'm curious whether you guys think this is right. My students, more and more, they're not interested in institutions. And they still want to be spiritual but not religious. So they think for them it's individual. They go, I didn't feel that way, so I just broke off. And they think, here's the weird paradox. By all of them doing the same thing, they think they're being different from everybody else. But it's, I think, I don't want to deny that the agency of an individual, as she thinks about it and goes, but I didn't have that relationship with my parents, or that's not what I think death is supposed to be like, or whatever she says, that she could have a spiritual practice that is unique to herself, and it could be a laboratory of one or something like that. Obviously, she's still informed by whatever she brought to that experience because she speaks a certain language and she lives in a certain time and place, and maybe she came from a community that taught her certain things about, well, that's what sexuality is, or that's how you should think about your parents, or whatever they said. But they alter it. I'm definitely one of these people that I was frustrated with the early Foucault when he talks about our subjectivity just being created by cookie cutter style by the machinery of the episteme that we live in, and the resistance is impossible. And I want to empower the individuals to say, well, that doesn't make sense to me. What do you think? And I think maybe a laboratory or a school is a good metaphor for thinking about how that dialogue gets structured by an institution.
Yeah, no, that is good. But then comes another question. How distinct do you think religious practices are from, I mean, if you read poetry or you discussed philosophically, that could open up domains for you.
Oh, poetry or philosophy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that I love this question. I don't think that they're distinct in the sense of, well, if you want to think about life, you have to be religious, or you have to join a religious community or something like that. What's this guy's name? Alva Noe. Do you know this name? I have him in my footnotes. This is his first name. That's his last name. He's at Berkeley, and he has, I think everyone will think this is interesting. He says we should see that poetry and philosophy, art and philosophy, are domains of our lives, or they're forms of our culture that he calls reorganizational practices. Because you really hadn't thought that a horse was like that until you saw the representation of a horse with that kind of beauty or something like that. And it makes you think about your relationship to horses from the painting. Or the jazz music example that we had yesterday, like my relationship to music changes because now I'm engaging with this art. And he thinks philosophy is like that too. So he thinks some things in our lives are reorganizational practices where representing it to ourselves makes us think about it, and he calls it looping down effects. So that now that I've said it out loud, gosh, I guess that's not right, or I guess that is right, and that's how art works, and he thinks that's how philosophy works. And he has those two as the domains of human culture that will reorganize your emotions, reorganize your thoughts, reorganize how you live your life. And it's bizarre to me that he doesn't have religion as a possibility there, and he doesn't think that religion makes people meditate or pray or contemplate is a very contemplative word, is a very religious word, contemplate what kind of life they want to have. And I think as brilliant as he is and as smart as he is about these kinds of things, he has that assumption, yeah, but religion just produces people who don't think. Especially rituals, right? Rituals are just mechanical, repetitious. There's a script, you have to do what they say. And they just think, well, rituals aren't thoughtful exercises. They're not creative exercises. They're cookie cutter exercises to make you be a certain kind of person. And he doesn't say that, but he's got 2 books on this idea of reorganizational practices. I think the first book where he introduces it, if you're Googling it, is called Strange Tools. But he thinks art is a strange tool and philosophy is a strange tool. And I guess I'm saying religion can be a strange tool.
Thank you very much.
Has anyone else come up with a question they would like to ask?
You guys need to think of rituals that I don't have in my paper and say, Schilbrack, what about this ritual? What's that make people think about? Like, how is that a laboratory of inquiry?
Well, until they think about that. Oh,
yeah.
I'll keep
Jazz.
my questioning
Jazz
reserved.
as a ritual.
Thank you. There might be a stupid question. I'm a bit sleepy today, but you raised the question that what is it that religion is acquiring, or what is the niche it adds? The idea of construction, for me at least, supposes some kind of active action and trying to achieve something important. But sometimes I feel like that maybe we just are religious because it can also be pointless. Humans do a lot of things which don't really add anything or acquire anything. They just kind of do. And perhaps religiosity is just some kind of little quirk that we acquired, and we are now dealing with it. And we tend to veer towards religious activities because we've kind of built into it. Might be a stupid question.
Do you have an example of a religious activity that the person just do it and they're not constructing anything?
Maybe not religious on the top of my head, but I I'm also really into fiber arts, and it makes me really scratch my head that in societies, archaic societies, in which acquiring materials is really, really, really difficult and really time-consuming, people have always made beautiful stuff, and beautiful stuff which is like so insanely expensive. Why? It doesn't have any practical meaning for us. It doesn't help us live. It doesn't help us in the way that the beavers are helped by building dams. It's expensive, it's pointless, but everybody does it. Why?
Tell me what you think about this. So there's this expensive need to get the materials to do this art, and people say this about my classes too. There's no job connected to that. There's no money connected to metaphysics and these theories of religion. That's not a job. We have, what do they call it? Criminal justice, that's a major. Construction management. That, like at my university, they've got some people are majors, and you know exactly what job that person's going to get when they graduate. And then if they study philosophy, they study religious studies, it's not quite clear what job they're going to get. So this goes back to the question about what's the instrumental value of what the person's doing. And I am treating it as if it has instrumental value. It's just not money that it's producing, or it's not food that it's producing. This guy, Alvin Noe, with his example of strange tools, and he said art and philosophy are the way that people reorganize their experience by engaging with art, engaging with music, engaging with dance, engaging with representation, but also philosophy. I'm putting religion in that same category, and to a certain extent that means I'm erasing the line between art and religion, or between religion and philosophy. There's going to be religious philosophers who are engaged with telling people to reorganize their lives, and there's going to be religious artists who have the same goal. But some of his examples are prehistoric art, and he thinks you look at that art, and especially if you let it have its effects on you, like you walk away from it slightly changed, and you start thinking, gosh, that's really beautiful. But it's not that it has no value, it's just that it doesn't put money in your pocket and doesn't put bread on your table, but it has, maybe you would say, emotional value. And so you go, you know what, I want to go back. I'm imagining I'm a cave person, I guess. I want to go back and I want to see that picture of the horse that guy drew, because like I felt like I was so close to a horse, and it just makes me feel better, makes me feel different, it makes me think about horses and all kinds of values, but they're not money in my pocket or bread on the table. So I'm hoping that you might say people return to art, and they return to philosophy, and they return to religion, partly because they want that feeling of electricity or power or closeness, or maybe it's a reorganization of their emotions, so they just feel different in a way that's valuable to them. And if you say, yeah, but you can't feed your kids with that, like that's true, you can't, but that's not the only kind of value. There's all kinds of affordances that will be invisible but real for the person that says, but that speaks to me in a really beautiful way.
Thank you.
I think there was a question there.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I will ask my question very slowly, because in my mind, I'm processing a lot of things right now, and I might kind of miscommunicate. So first, have I understood correctly when you were talking about about approaching the study of religion through this model of approaching through how the sciences do their research, which is a hypothetical model in the sense you have a hypothesis, which is a predetermined expectation or a goal, that if I mix let's say sodium and chloride, then I'll get sodium chloride, which is salt. So it is a hypothesis which then we test out, and then we reach a certain conclusion. So it's already a preset, a predetermined goal. Right. So did I understand correctly? Is that what you are saying, that this is a way to approach the study of religion, that the religions that exist around us already have a preset, a predetermined goal? So for instance, you gave this example of burial, of the funeral, right? So you should do certain activities so that you reach this preset idea of being a good son, a good daughter, which is preset. Now, so my question is, what if this preset idea does not exist in a religion? So what if this the predetermined goal of you do this practice and therefore you will become this does not exist? Because, for instance, like you rightly said, this I can quote Hinduism because I've worked with it for a very long time. So you have this concept of the Atman and the Brahman and moksha and the karmic cycle. But I engage with religions where there is no concept of karmic cycle, there is no concept of the Brahman, there is no concept of the Atman. You do a practice. So, for instance, I can give you an example. If I arrive at this place, at this spot, and I like that I say that, okay, this spot is good enough for me to build my house here. After I arrive, after I have that encounter with that space, is when I come to a realization that perhaps, probably, there is something that existed here before I arrived here. And therefore, I start doing a ritual. And I say this, so I'm sharing with you like a concept, but I'm saying this from my fieldwork context, where if so this comes from the Karbi indigenous religion. So if they arrive at a certain space, they do not come with this predetermined idea that, okay, this space is good or this space is bad or any preset goal. They come there and they say, okay, we are arriving here at this spot, but there is a possibility that there can be something that already inhabited this space before we arrived. Therefore, what we will do is we will perform certain ritual so that it creates, like you said, it creates an affordance for us to kind of coexist without, kind of disturbing the ecological balance in a sense. So what happens of this kind of construction of a predetermined goal, which therefore, kind of results into the formation of religion in contexts where the preset goal is non-existent. So yeah, sorry for the long.
No, I love this question, and I appreciate it, especially as I've hinted over the past couple of days. I'm trying these ideas out for the first time, and I'm not sure where my steps will be solid and where my steps will be shaky. And so the idea that I'm putting on the table is that religions involve exploration and investigation and inquiry. And I'm comparing them to science in that respect, but you're helping me because I don't think that religious people or religious leaders or religious texts have a hypothesis that they want to test, and they're like, oh, you should come to church on Sunday and test this hypothesis. I don't think they have that. But you were saying, oh, when we combine this and that, what kind of product does it make in the laboratory? I'm imagining, let's say there is the National Institute of Health, and in that National Institute, they have a lot of medical schools, and they're trying out different things. Well, what's the best way for us to model how cancer spreads, or what's the best way to resist the COVID virus? And they're trying out different things, and their overall goal is health. Right? And that's my model, that people are participating in this because they think, I think I'm on a path that's really important. I think I'm learning about myself and about my family, about my sexuality, about my aging, about my relationship to mortality, whatever it is that's valuable to them that they're getting out of that practice. And it's not like, well, you must do this and test this hypothesis. There probably are some, what would you call them, sub-activities or sub-programs in a religion that they're not testing anything. They tell this boy, light this candle and carry it and swing it in a certain way or something like that, and that boy's not testing how do candles swing or something like that. It's just, it's part of the material culture of this temple, let's say, for example. But the rest of your question seems to fit so nicely, I hope, with my theory to say, well, they don't have a preset idea of where they're supposed to build this or whether there's a spirit there, or they don't have a goal or a hypothesis that they're trying to prove. It feels right to them, and they think, well, maybe there was something here before. That sounds exactly like an exploration of a territory, but I guess the frame that I would love to have result from this lecture is that people would say, yeah, because the scientific people, they're learning facts about the world, and religious people are making stuff up. And I'm saying, no, they're in the same model. It's just one of them is interested in empirical realities, and the other one is interested in spiritual realities. And so if they say, but this feels like a home to me, and there must be a certain kind of spirit here, or a certain kind of deity here, or I'm responding to something that's here, they are, I would say, I'm making this up and I'm imposing it on your example, and you can tell me if it doesn't sound right, but they are exploring their relationship to the land and to the world and to space. And it feels good here, and I have a spiritual explanation of why. They didn't have a preset place where it had to be, or an answer, but they had the tools and the conceptual structure and the social support from people who talked a certain way and had certain expectations. This is the best way for you to try this out, or to locate your home or your temple or whatever it is that the person's putting there, your altar.
Well, if not, I'll ask a simple question myself, or maybe not that simple, but if you are thinking of niche construction in the sense you laid out, then one could also ask what in human activity or in religious activity specifically is not niche construction. I mean, the answer could be that that's not an issue, that it's a framework through which to watch things. But I was thinking more in the lines, if you want to set deliberate lines about what part of the whole human thing you are trying to carve out.
Yeah. I'm making myself a note. I think niche construction is this idea that people make the world a home for themselves, and they make their life comfortable for themselves, and they're going to do that when they go shopping and they put apples in the refrigerator, right? When they put a blanket on their bed, there's going to be a million innumerable activities that are part of niche construction. And it's kind of like the question was, well, what do human beings do that does not contribute to their evolution? Like, I don't know exactly what. But you could still have the following contrast. I think some people are involved in niche destruction. And so they've got some activities that they say, there's structures that make people's lives easier, and I want to tear those up or destroy those or get rid of those because I don't approve of them. So there can be activities that would be shaping the future evolution of the human animal, like the invention of fire and the domestication of plants and so forth. But there's going to be certain activities that people do that will limit the future of the human species, or some of them. As they are destructive and warlike.
Okay. If it's a quick question.
Well, you asked a big question, yes? Okay.
I want to continue with Indrek's question, and I want to ask you, I will give you an example and ask you whether it will fit your niche construction theory. So there are two mountains in this in Northeast India, and this particular mountain is home to an invisible village. People don't go there, but there are a lot of boulders, and the terrain is mountainous, and there's very special trees, and it's a very special landscape. But people live there, but we don't see them. So this particular landscape, people explained to me when I went there that they are, this is the place through which you can go inside to their landscape, their congruent geography. So can you tell me, like, when there is no human agent over there, but the agents are other than human, would it also fit into this niche construction theory where, it is the other than human who is building this landscape according to what is most comfortable for them?
I found myself using that phrase, human niche, like the construction of the human niche. And it sounds like, if I'm understanding, the building of our village is part of our construction of the human niche and our providing of food, but even our religious beliefs about the invisible people who are there or the invisible village, those teachings and the way we respect what they're doing over there, that's also part of how we're creating our home and making it comfortable. I haven't been to India, but I was in Iceland recently, and they were talking about invisible beings, and they had stones, and they would put offerings out for on the stones, and they treated it like it was folklore, or it was very old-fashioned, but people were still putting things on those stones.
Just to add,
yeah.
just to clarify this, this village has impact, this invisible village and the people there has impact on the lives of visible, tangible humans. Mm-hmm. So it's like a interactive, sometimes somebody from this village gets married to a human, and so how would that actually fit the...
Wow, it's such a complicated example. Does it make your life better to marry an invisible person? My ex-wife would say yes.
They are visible when they come out to the human realm.
Oh, okay. But I think that, my interest is in this human culture and the creation of this human niche, and I would say, oh, well, how are we creating our human niche? But if somebody said, but those invisible people, I don't know what they're called, these spirits.
Yeah, no, they're not spirits. They're other than humans.
These other than human, but they have an other than human niche that they are building, right? And so I think niche construction theory would work for both, but maybe not the human niche, which I don't know if they eat the same foods we do, or if they have the same needs for a home that I have, and so forth. So maybe their niche is going to look different from my niche. It won't look like anything because it's invisible, but but maybe the two niches are different. The Gibson guy that I mentioned before, it's amazing the drawings that he did. He's not an artist, but he's just trying to imagine, what is it like if you're blind? What is it like if you're deaf? What is it like if you have different senses? Because you live in a different niche, and I think if you have a different body and a different capacities, your niche will be different.
Okay, I think we'll conclude here, and we'll look forward to the published version and see how these lectures affected it. And so let's thank him one more.